This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 13. Prisoners of the Sea Monster. The room in the enchanted castle which Zog called his den, and in which the wicked sea monster passed most of his time, was a perfectly shaped dome of solid gold. The upper part of this dome was thickly set with precious jewels, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and emeralds, which sparkled beautifully through the crystal water. The lower walls were as thickly studded with pearls, all being of perfect shape and color. Many of the pearls were larger than any which may be found upon earth, for the sea people know where to find the very best, and hide them away where men cannot discover them. The golden floor was engraved with designs of rare beauty, depicting not only sea life, but many adventures upon land. In the room were several large golden cabinets, the doors of which were closed and locked, and in addition to the cabinets, there were tables, chairs, and sofas, the latter upholstered with softest sealskins. Handsome rugs of exquisitely woven seaweeds were scattered about, the colors of which were artistically blended together. In one corner, a fountain of air bubbled up through the water. The entire room was lighted as brilliantly as if exposed to the direct rays of the sun, yet where this light came from our friends could not imagine. No lamp or other similar device was visible anywhere. The strangers at first scarcely glanced at all these beautiful things, for in an easy chair sat Zog himself, more wonderful than any other living creature, and as they gazed upon him, their eyes seemed fascinated as if held by a spell. Zog's face was the face of a man, except that the tops of his ears were pointed like horns, and he had small horns instead of eyebrows and a horn on the end of his chin. In spite of these deformities, the expression of the face was not unpleasant or repulsive. His hair was carefully parted and brushed, and his mouth and nose were not only perfect in shape, but quite handsome. Only the eyes betrayed Zog and made him terrible to all beholders. They seemed like coals of glowing fire, and sparkled so fiercely that no one ever cared to meet their gaze for more than an instant. Perhaps the monster realized this, for he usually drooped his long lashes over his fiery eyes to shut out their glare. Zog had two well-shaped legs which ended in the hoofs of beasts instead of feet, and these hoofs were shod with gold. His body was a shapeless mass covered with rich embroidered raiment, over which a great robe of cloth of gold fell in many folds. This robe was intended to hide the magician's body from view, but Trot noticed that the cloth moved constantly in little ripples, as if what lay underneath would not keep still. The best features of which Zog could boast were his arms and hands, the latter being as well formed, as delicate and white as those of a well-bred woman. When he spoke, his voice sounded sweet and clear, and its tones were very gentle. He had given them a few minutes to stare at him, for he was examining them in turn with considerable curiosity. "Well," said he, "do you not find me the most hateful creature you have ever beheld?" The queen refrained from answering, but Trot said promptly, "We do. Nothing could be more horrider or more disgusting than you are, it seems to me." Very good indeed," declared the monster, lifting his lashes to flash his glowing eyes upon her. Then he turned toward Cap'n Bill. "Man-fish," he continued, "what do you think of me?" "Mighty little," the sailor replied. "You orter be 'shamed to ask such a question, knowin' you look worse nor the devil himself." "Very true," answered Zog, frowning. He felt that he had received a high compliment, and the frown showed he was pleased with Cap'n Bill. But now Queen Aquareine advanced to a position in front of their captor and said, "Tell me, Zog, why have you trapped us and brought us here?" "To destroy you," was the quick answer, and the magician turned for an instant to flash his eyes upon the beautiful mermaid. "For 200 years I have been awaiting a chance to get within my power some friend of Anko the Sea Serpent, of Anko whom I hate," he added, smiling sweetly. "When you left your palace today, my swift spies warned me, and so I sent the sea devils to capture you. Often have they tried to do this before, but always failed. Today, acting by my command, they tricked you, and by surrounding you, forced you to the entrance of my enchanted castle. The result is a fine capture of important personages. I have now in my power the queen and princess of the fairy mermaids, as well as 2 wandering earth people, and I assure you I shall take great enjoyment in destroying you utterly." "You are a coward," declared the queen proudly. "You dared not meet us in the open sea." "No, I dare not leave this castle," Zog admitted, still smiling. "But here in my own domain, my power is supreme. Nothing can interfere with my vengeance." "That remains to be seen," said Aquareine, firmly meeting the gaze of the terrible eyes. "Of course," he answered, nodding his head with a graceful movement. "You will try to thwart me and escape. You will pit your fairy power against my powers of magic. This will give me great pleasure, for the more you struggle, the greater will be my revenge." "But why should you seek revenge upon us?" asked Clia. "We have never harmed you." "That is true," replied Zog. "I bear you no personal ill will, but you are friends of my great enemy, King Anko, and it will annoy him very much when he finds that you have been destroyed by me. I cannot hurt the rascally old sea serpent himself, but through you I can make him feel my vengeance." "The mermaids have existed thousands of years," said the queen in a tone of pride. "Do you imagine the despised and conquered Zog has power to destroy them?" "I do not know," was the quiet answer. "It will be interesting to discover which is the more powerful." "I challenge you to begin the test at once, vile magician!" exclaimed Aquareine. "There is no hurry, fair queen," answered Zog in his softest tones. "I have been so many years in accomplishing your capture that it is foolish to act hastily now. Besides, I am lonely. Here in my forced retirement, I see only those uninteresting earth mortals whom I have made my slaves, for all sea dwellers are forbidden to serve me save the sea devils, and they dare not enter my castle. I have saved many mortals from drowning and brought them here to people my castle, but I do not love mortals. 2 lovely mermaids are much more interesting, and before I allow you to perish, I shall have much amusement in witnessing your despair and your struggles to escape. You are now my prisoners. By slow degrees, I shall wear out your fairy powers and break your hearts, as well as the hearts of these earth dwellers who have no magic powers, and I think it will be a long time before I finally permit you to die." "That's all right," said Trot cheerfully. "The longer I live, the better I'll be satisfied." "That's how I feel about it," added Cap'n Bill. "Don't get in a hurry to kill us, Zog. It'll be such a wear and tear on your nerves. Just take it easy and let us live as long as we can." "Don't you care to die?" asked the magician. "It's a thing I never longed for," the sailor replied. "You see, we had no business to go on a trip with the mermaids to begin with. I've allus heard tell that mermaids is dangerous, and no one as met 'em ever lived to tell the tale, eh, Trot?" "That's what you said, Cap'n Bill." "So I guess we're done for one way or another, and it don't matter much which. But Trot's a good child and mighty young and tender. It don't seem like her time has come to die. I'd like to have her sent safe home to her mother. So I've got this here proposition to make, Zog. If your magic could make me die twice, or even 3 times for good measure, why you go ahead and do it, and I won't complain. All I ask is for you to send this little girl safe back to dry land again." "Don't you do it, Zog!" cried Trot indignantly. And turning to Cap'n Bill, she added, "I'm not going to leave you down here in all this mess, Cap'n, and don't you think it. If one of us gets out of the muddle we're in, we'll both get out. So don't you make any bargains with Zog to die twice." Zog listened to this conversation very carefully. "The dying does not amount to much," he said. "It is the thinking about it that hurts you mortals most. I've watched many a shipwreck at sea, and the people would howl and scream for hours before the ship broke up. Their terror was very enjoyable, but when the end came, they all drowned as peacefully as if they were going to sleep, so it didn't amuse me at all." "I'm not worrying," said Trot. "Ner me," said Cap'n Bill. "You'll find we can take what comes just as easy as anybody." "I do not expect to get much fun from you poor mortals," said Zog carelessly. You are merely a sideshow to my circus, a sort of dessert to my feast of vengeance. When the time comes, I can find 100 ways to kill you. My most interesting prisoners are these pretty mermaids, who claim that none of their race has ever yet died or been destroyed. The first mermaid ever created is living yet, and I am told she is none other than Queen Aquareine. So I have a pretty problem before me to invent some way to destroy the mermaids or put them out of existence, and it will require some thought. Also, it will require some power you do not possess, suggested the queen. That may be, replied Zog softly, but I am going to experiment, and I believe I shall be able to cause you a lot of pain and sorrow before I finally make an end of you. I have not lived 27,000 years, Aquareine, without getting a certain amount of wisdom, and I am more powerful than you suspect. You are a monster and a wicked magician, said the Mermaid Queen. I am, agreed Zog, but I cannot help it. I was created part man, part bird, part fish, part beast, and part reptile, and such a monstrosity could not be otherwise than wicked. Everybody hates me, and I hate everybody. Why don't you kill yourself? Asked Trot. I've tried that and failed, he answered. Only one being in the world has power to destroy me, and that is King Anko, the sea serpent. Then you'd better let him do it, advised the little girl. No, much as I long to die, I cannot allow King Anko the pleasure of killing me. He has always been my worst enemy, and it would be such a joy to him to kill me that I really cannot allow him. Indeed, I have always hoped to kill Anko. I have now been 3,642 years, 11 months, and 9 days figuring out a plan to destroy old Anko, and as yet I have not discovered a way. I'd give it up if I were you, advised Trot. Don't you think you could get some fun out of trying to be good? No, cried Zog, and his voice was not so soft as before. Listen, Aquareine, you and your attendants shall be prisoners in this castle until I can manage to stop you from living. Rooms will be placed at your disposal, and I wish you to go to them at once, as I am tired of looking at you. You're no more tired than we are, remarked Trot. It's lucky you can't see yourself, Zog. He turned his glowing eyes full upon her. The worst of my queer body I keep concealed, he said. If ever you see it, you will scream with terror. He touched a bell beside him, and the girl was surprised to find how clearly its tones rang through the water. In an instant, the boy Sacco appeared and bowed low before his dreadful master. Take the mermaids and the child to the rose chamber, commanded Zog, and take the old man-fish to the peony room. Sacco turned to obey. Are the outer passages well guarded? Asked the monster. Yes, as you have commanded, said the boy. Then you may allow the prisoners to roam at will throughout the castle. Now go. The prisoners followed Sacco from the room, glad to get away. The presence of this evil being had grown oppressive to them, and Zog had himself seemed ill at ease during the last few minutes. The robe so closely wound around his body moved jerkily, as if something beneath disturbed it, and at such times Zog shifted nervously in his seat. Sacco's thin little legs trotted through the water and led the way into a different passage from the one by which they had entered. They swam slowly after him and breathed easier when they had left the golden-domed chamber where their wicked enemy sat enthroned. "Well, how do you like him?" asked Sacco with a laugh. "We hate him," declared Trot emphatically. "Of course you do," replied Sacco. "But you're wasting time hating anything. It doesn't do you any good or him any harm. Can you sing?" "A little," said Trot, "but I don't feel like singing now." "You're wrong about that," the boy asserted. "Anything that keeps you from singing is foolishness, unless it's laughter. Laughter, joy, and song are the only good things in the world." Trot did not answer this queer speech, for just then they came to a flight of stairs, and Sacco climbed up them while the others swam. And now they were in a lofty, broad corridor, having many rooms hung with seaweed draperies. At one of these doorways, Sacco stopped and said, "Here is the Rose Chamber where the master commands you to live until you die. You may wander anywhere in the castle as you please. To leave it is impossible. Whenever you return to the rose chamber, you will know it by this design of roses, sewn in pearls upon the hangings. The peony room, where the man-fish is to live, is the next one farther on." "Thank you," replied Queen Aquareine. "Are we to be fed?" "Meals will be served in your rooms. If you desire anything, ring the bell, and some of the slaves will be sure to answer it. I am mostly in attendance upon my master, but whenever I am at liberty, I will look after your comfort myself." Again they thanked the strange boy, and he turned and left them. They could hear him whistle and sing as he returned along the passage. Then Princess Clia parted the curtains that her queen and companions might enter the rose chamber. End of chapter 13. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 14. Cap'n Joe and Cap'n Bill. The rooms Zog had given his prisoners were as handsome as all other parts of this strange enchanted castle. Gold was used plentifully in the decorations, and in the rose chamber occupied by the mermaids and Trot, golden roses formed a border around the entire room. The sea maidens had evidently been expected, for the magician had provided couches for them to recline upon, similar to the ones used in the mermaid palaces. The frames were of mother of pearl and the cushions of soft white sponges. In the room were toilet tables, mirrors, ornaments, and many articles used by Earth people, which they afterward learned had been plundered by Zog from sunken ships and brought to his castle by his allies, the sea devils. While the mermaids were examining and admiring their room, Cap'n Bill went to the peony room to see what it was like and found his quarters very cozy and interesting. There were pictures on the walls, portraits of grave-looking porpoises, bashful seals, and smug and smiling walruses. Some of the wall panels were formed of mirrors and reflected clearly the interior of the room. Around the ceiling was a frieze of imitation peonies in silver, and the furniture was peony-shaped, the broad leaves being bent to form seats and couches. Beside a pretty dressing table hung a bell cord with a tassel at the end. Cap'n Bill did not know it was a bell cord, so he pulled it to see what would happen and was puzzled to find that nothing seemed to happen at all, the bell being too far away for him to hear it. Then he began looking at the treasures contained in this royal apartment, and was much pleased with a golden statue of a mermaid that resembled Princess Clia in feature. A silver flower vase upon a stand contained a bouquet of gorgeous peonies, as natural as life, said Cap'n Bill, although he saw plainly that they must be made of metal. Trot came in just then to see how her dear friend was located. She entered from the doorway that connected the two rooms and said, "Isn't it pretty, Cap'n? And who'd ever think that awful creature Zog owned such a splendid castle and kept his prisoners in such lovely rooms?" "I once heard tell," said the sailor, "of a foreign people that sacrificed human beings to please their pagan gods, and before they killed 'em outright, they stuffed the victims full of good things to eat, and dressed 'em in pretty clothes, and treated 'em like princes. That's why I don't take much comfort in our fine surroundin's, Trot. This Zog is a pagan if ever there was one, and he don't mean us any good, you may depend on it." "No," replied Trot soberly. "I'm sure he doesn't expect us to be happy here. But I'm going to fool him and have just a good time as I can." As she spoke, they both turned around, an easy thing to do with a single flop of their flexible tails, and Cap'n Bill uttered a cry of surprise. Just around the room stood a perfect duplicate of himself. The round head with its bald top and scraggly whiskers, the sailor cap and shirt, the wide pantaloons, even the wooden leg, each and every one were exact copies of those owned by Cap'n Bill. Even the expression in the light blue eyes was the same, and it is no wonder the old sailor stared at his double in amazement. But the next minute he laughed and said, "Why, Trot, it's me reflected in a mirror. But at first I thought it was someone else." Trot was staring too. "Look, Cap'n," she whispered. "Look at the wooden leg." "Well, it's my wooden leg, ain't it?" he inquired. "If it is, it can't be a reflection in a mirror," she argued, "for you haven't got a wooden leg. You've got a fish's tail." The old sailor was so startled by this truth that he gave a great flop with his tail that upset his balance and made him keel a somersault in the water before he got right side up again. Then he found the other sailor man laughing at him and was horrified to find the reflection advancing toward them by stumping along on its wooden leg. "Keep away! Get out there!" yelled Cap'n Bill. "You're a ghost, the ghost of me that once was, and I can't bear the sight of you. Get out!" "Did you ring just to tell me to get out?" asked the other in a mild voice. "I didn't ring," declared Cap'n Bill. "You did. You pulled that bell cord," said the one-legged man. "Oh, did pullin' that thing ring a bell?" inquired the Cap'n, a little ashamed of his ignorance and reassured by hearing the ghost talk. "It surely did," was the reply, "and Sacho told me to answer your bell and look after you. So I'm a lookin' after you." "I wish you wouldn't," protested Cap'n Bill. "I've no use for ghostses, anyhow." The strange sailor began to chuckle at hearing this, and his chuckle was just like Cap'n Bill's chuckle, so full of merry humor that it usually made everyone laugh with him. "Who are you?" asked Trot, who was very curious and much surprised. "I'm Cap'n Joe," was the reply. "Cap'n Joe Weedles, formerly of the brig Gladsome, and now a slave of Zog at the bottom of the sea." "Joe Weedles!" gasped Cap'n Bill, amazed. "Joe Weedles of the Gladsome? Why, dash my eyes, mate, you must be my brother!" "Are you Bill Weedles?" asked the other. And then he added, "But no, you can't be. Bill wasn't no merman. He were a human critter like myself." "That's what I am," said Cap'n Bill hastily. "I'm a human critter, too. I've just borrowed this fish tail to swim with while I'm visitin' the mermaids." "Well, well," said Cap'n Joe in astonishment. "Who'd 'a' thought it? And who'd ever 'a' thought I'd find my long lost brother in Zog's enchanted castle, full 50 fathoms deep down in the wet, wet water?" "Why, as for that," replied Cap'n Bill, "it's you as is the long lost brother, not me. You and your ship disappeared many a year ago and ain't ever been heard of since, while as for me, I'm livin' on earth yet." "You don't look it to all appearances," remarked Cap'n Joe in a reflective tone of voice. "But I'll agree it's many a year since I saw the top of the water, and I'm not expectin' to ever tramp on dry land again." "Are you dead, or drownded, or what?" asked Cap'n Bill. "Neither one nor t'other," was the answer. "But Zog gave me gills so's I could live in the water like fishes do, and if I got on land, I couldn't breathe air any more'n a fish out o' water can. So I guess as long as I live, I'll have to stay down here." "Do you like it?" asked Trot. "Oh, I don't object much," said Cap'n Joe. "There ain't much excitement here, for we don't catch a flock of mermaids every day, but the work is easy and the rations fair. I might 'a' been worse off, you know, for when my brig was wrecked, I'd 'a' gone to Davy Jones' locker if Zog hadn't happened to find me and made me a fish." "You don't look as much like a fish as Cap'n Bill does," observed Trot. "P'raps not," said Cap'n Joe, "but I notice Bill ain't got any gills and breathes like you and the mermaids does. When he gets back to land, he'll have his 2 legs again and live in comfort breathin' air." "I won't have 2 legs," asserted Cap'n Bill, "for when I'm on earth, I'm fitted with 1 wooden leg, just the same as you are, Joe." "Oh, I hadn't heard of that, Bill, but I'm not surprised," replied Brother Joe. "Many a sailor gets to wear a wooden leg in time. Mine's hickory." "So's mine," said Cap'n Bill with an air of pride. "I'm glad I've run across you, Joe, for I often wondered what had become of you. Seems too bad, though, to have you spend all your life under water." "What's the odds?" asked Cap'n Joe. "I never could keep away from the water since I was a boy, and there's more dangers to be met floatin' on it than there is soakin' in it. And one other thing pleases me when I think on it. I'm parted from my wife, a mighty good woman with a tongue like a 2-edged sword, and my poor widder'll get the insurance money and live happy. As for me, Bill, I'm a good deal happier than I was when she kept scoldin' me from mornin' to night every minute I was home." "Is Zog a kind master?" asked Trot. "I can't say he's kind," replied Cap'n Joe, "for he's as near a devil as any living critter can be. He grumbles and growls in his soft voice all day and hates himself and everybody else. But I don't see much of him. There's so many of us slaves here that Zog don't pay much attention to us, and we have a pretty good time when the old magician is shut up in his den, as he mostly is." "Could you help us to escape?" asked the child. "Why, I don't know how," admitted Cap'n Joe. "There's magic all around us, and we slaves are never allowed to leave this great cave. I'll do what I can, of course, but Sacho is the boy to help you if anyone can. That little chap knows a heap, I can tell you. So now, if nothin' more's wanted, I must get back to work." "What work do you do?" Cap'n Bill asked. "I sew buttons on Zog's clothes. Every time he gets mad, he busts his buttons off, and I have to sew 'em on again. As he's mad most of the time, it keeps me busy." "I'll see you again, won't I, Joe?" said Cap'n Bill. "No reason why you shouldn't, if you manage to keep alive," said Cap'n Joe. "But you mustn't forget, Bill, that Zog has his grip on you, and I've never known anything to escape him yet." Saying this, the old sailor began to stump toward the door, but tripped his foot against his wooden leg and gave a swift dive forward. He would have fallen flat had he not grabbed the drapery at the doorway and saved himself by holding fast to it with both hands. Even then, he rolled and twisted so awkwardly before he could get upon his legs that Trot had to laugh outright at his antics. "This hickory leg," said Cap'n Joe, "is so blamed light that it always wants to float. Aga Gru, the gold worker, has promised me a gold leg that will stay down, but he never has time to make it. You're mighty lucky, Bill, to have a merman's tail instead o' legs." "I guess I am, Joe," replied Bill, "for in such a wet country the fishes have the best of it. But I ain't sure I'd like this sort of thing always." "Think of the money you'd make in a sideshow," said Cap'n Joe with his funny chuckling laugh. Then he pounded his wooden leg against the hard floor and managed to hobble from the room without more accidents. When he had gone, Trot said, "Aren't you glad to find your brother again, Cap'n Bill?" "Why, so," replied the sailor. "I don't know much about Joe, seein' as we haven't met before for many a long year, and all I remember about our boyhood days is that we fought and pulled hair most of the time. But what worries me most is Joe's lookin' so much like me myself, wooden leg and all. Don't you think it's rather cheeky and unbrotherly, Trot?" "Perhaps he can't help it," suggested the child. "And anyhow, he'll never be able to live on land again." "No," said Cap'n Bill with a sigh. "Joe's a fish now, and so he ain't likely to be took for me by any of our friends on the earth." End of chapter 14. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 15. The Magic of the Mermaids. When Trot and Cap'n Bill entered the Rose Chamber, they found the two mermaids reclining before an air fountain that was sending thousands of tiny bubbles up through the water. "These fountains of air are excellent things," remarked Queen Aquareine, "for they keep the water fresh and sweet, and that is the more necessary when it is confined by walls, as it is in this castle. But now let us counsel together and decide what to do in the emergency that confronts us." "How can we tell what to do without knowing what's going to happen?" asked Trot. "Something's sure to happen," said Cap'n Bill. As if to prove his words, a gong suddenly sounded at their door, and in walked a fat little man clothed all in white, including a white apron and white cap. His face was round and jolly, and he had a big mustache that curled up at the ends. "Well, well," said the little man, spreading out his legs and putting his hands on his hips as he stood looking at them. "Of all the queer things in the sea, you're the queerest. Mermaids, eh?" "Don't bunch us that way," protested Cap'n Bill. "You're quite wrong," said Trot. "I'm a girl." "With a fish's tail?" he asked, laughing at her. That's only just for a while, she said. While I'm in the water, you know. When I'm at home on the land, I walk just as you do, and so does Cap'n Bill. But we haven't any gills, remarked the captain, looking closely at the little man's throat. So I take it we're not as fishy as some others. If you mean me, I must admit you are right, said the little man, twisting his mustaches. I'm as near a fish as a man can be. But you see, Cap'n, without the gills that make me a fish, I could not live under water. When it comes to that, you've no business to live under water, asserted the sailor. But I suppose you're a slave and can't help it. I'm chief cook for that old horror Zog. And that reminds me, good mermaids, or good people, or good girls and sailors, or whatever you are, that I'm sent here to ask what you'd like to eat. Glad to see you, sir, said Cap'n Bill. I'm nearly starved myself. I had it in mind, said the little man, to prepare a regular mermaid dinner, but since you're not mermaids... Oh, two of us are, said the queen, smiling. I, my good cook, am Aquareine, the ruler of the mermaids, and this is the Princess Clea. I've often heard of you, your majesty, returned the chief cook, bowing respectfully, and I must say I've heard only good of you. Now that you have unfortunately become my master's prisoners, it will give me pleasure to serve you as well as I am able. We thank you, good sir, said Aquareine. What have you got to eat? Inquired Trot. Seems to me I'm hollow way down to my toes, my tail, I mean, and it'll take a lot to fill me up. We haven't eaten a morsel since breakfast, you know. I think I shall be able to give you almost anything you would like, said the cook. Zog is a wonderful magician and can procure anything that exists with no more effort than a wiggle of his thumb. But some eatables, you know, are hard to serve under water because they get so damp that they are soon ruined. Ah, it is different with the mermaids, said Princess Clea. Yes, all your things are kept dry because they are surrounded by air. I've heard how the mermaids live, but here it is different. Take this ring, said the queen, handing the chief cook a circlet which she drew from her finger. While it is in your possession, the food you prepare will not get wet or even moist. I thank your majesty, returned the cook, taking the ring. My name is Tom Atto, and I'll do my best to please you. How would you like for luncheon some oysters on the half-shell, clam broth, shrimp salad, broiled turtle steak, and watermelon? That will do very nicely, answered the queen. Do watermelons grow in the sea? Asked Trot. Of course, that is why they are called watermelons, replied Tom Atto. I think I shall serve you a water ice in addition to the rest. Water ice is an appropriate seafood. Have some watercress with the salad, said Cap'n Bill. I thought of that, declared the cook. Doesn't my bill of fare make your mouths water? Hurry up and get it ready, suggested Trot. Tom Atto at once bowed and retired, and when they were alone, Cap'n Bill said to the queen, Do you think, ma'am, we can manage to escape from Zog and his castle? I hope we shall find a way, replied Aquareine. The evil powers of magic which Zog controls may not prove to be as strong as the fairy powers I possess, but of course I cannot be positive until I discover what this wicked magician is able to do. Princess Clea was looking out of one of the windows. I think I can see an opening far up in the top of the dome, she said. They all hastened to the windows to look, and although Trot and Cap'n Bill could see nothing but a solid dome above the castle, perhaps because it was so far away from them, the sharp eyes of Aquareine were not to be deceived. Yes, she announced, there is surely an opening in the center of the great dome. A little thought must convince us that such an opening is bound to exist, for otherwise the water confined within the dome would not be fresh or clear. Then if we could escape from this castle, we could swim up to the hole in the dome and get free, exclaimed Trot. Why, Zog has probably ordered the opening well guarded, as he has all other outlets, responded the queen. Yet it may be worthwhile for us to make the attempt to get back into the broad ocean this way. The night would be the best time when all are asleep, and surely it will be quicker to reach the ocean through the hole in the roof than by means of the long winding passages by which we entered. But we will have to break out of the castle in some way, observed Cap'n Bill. That will not be difficult, answered Aquareine. It will be no trouble for me to shatter one of these panes of glass, allowing us to pass out and swim straight up to the top of the dome. Let's do it now, said Trot eagerly. No, my dear, we must wait for a good opportunity when we are not watched closely. "We do not wish the terrible Zog to thwart our plan," answered the queen gently. Presently, two sailor boys entered, bearing trays of food which they placed upon a large table. They were cheery-faced young fellows with gills at their throats, but had laughing eyes, and Trot was astonished not to find any of the slaves of Zog weeping or miserable. Instead, they were as jolly and good-natured as could be, and seemed to like their life under the water. Cap'n Bill asked one of these boys how many slaves were in the castle, and the youth replied that he would try to count them and let him know. Tom Atto had, they found, prepared for them an excellent meal, and they ate heartily because they were really hungry. After luncheon, Cap'n Bill smoked his pipe contentedly, and they renewed their conversation, planning various ways to outwit Zog and make their escape. While thus engaged, the gong at the door sounded, and Sacco entered. "My diabolical master commands you to attend him," said the boy. "When?" asked Aquareine. "At once, your majesty." "Very well, we will follow you," she said. So they swam down the corridors, following Sacco, until they again reached the golden-domed room they had formerly visited. Here sat Zog just as they had left him, seemingly, but when the prisoners entered, the magician arose and stood upon his cloven feet, and then silently walked to a curtained archway. Sacco commanded the prisoners to follow, and beyond the archway they found a vast chamber that occupied the center of the castle and was as big as a ballroom. Zog, who seemed to walk with much difficulty because his ungainly body swayed back and forth, did not go far beyond the arched entrance. A golden throne was set nearby, and in this the monster seated himself. At one side of the throne stood a group of slaves. They were men, women, and children. All had broad gold bands clasped around their ankles as a badge of servitude, and at each throat were the fish's gills that enabled them to breathe and live under water. Yet every face was smiling and serene, even in the presence of their dread master. In parts of the big hall were groups of other slaves. Sacco ranged the prisoners in a circle before Zog's throne, and slowly the magician turned his eyes, glowing like live coals, upon the four. "Captives," said he, speaking in his clear, sweet voice, "in our first interview you defied me, and both the mermaid queen and the princess declared they could not die. But if that is a true statement, as I have yet to discover, there are various ways to make you miserable and unhappy, and this I propose to do in order to amuse myself at your expense. You have been brought here to undergo the first trial of strength between us." None of the prisoners replied to this speech, so Zog turned to one of his slaves and said, "Revivi, bring in the Yell Maker." Revivi was a big fellow, brown of skin and with flashing black eyes. He bowed to his master and left the room by an archway covered with heavy draperies. The next moment, these curtains were violently pushed aside, and a dreadful sea creature swam into the hall. It had a body much like that of a crab, only more round and of a jet-black color. Its eyes were bright yellow balls set on the ends of two horns that stuck out of its head. They were cruel-looking eyes, too, and seemed able to see every person in the room at the same time. The legs of the Yell Maker, however, were the most curious part of the creature. There were 6 of them, slender and black as coal, and each extended 12 to 15 feet from its body when stretched out in a straight line. They were hinged in several places, so they could be folded up or extended at will. At the ends of these thin legs were immense claws shaped like those of a lobster, and they were real nippers of a most dangerous sort. The prisoners knew as soon as they saw the awful claws why the thing was called the Yell Maker, and Trot gave a little shiver and crept closer to Cap'n Bill. Zog looked with approval upon the creature he had summoned and said to it, "I give you 4 victims, the 4 people with fishes' tails. Let me hear how loud they can yell." The Yell Maker uttered a grunt of pleasure and in a flash stretched out one of its long legs toward the queen's nose, where its powerful claws came together with a loud snap. Aquareine did not stir, she only smiled. Both Zog and the creature that had attacked her seemed much surprised to find she was unhurt. "Again!" cried Zog, and again the Yell Maker's claw shot out and tried to pinch the queen's pretty ear. But the magic of the fairy mermaid was proof against this sea rascal's strength and swiftness. nor could he touch any part of Aquareine, although he tried again and again, roaring with anger like a mad bull. Trot began to enjoy this performance, and as her merry, childish laughter rang out, the Yell Maker turned furiously upon the little girl, two of the dreadful claws trying to nip her at the same time. She had no chance to cry out or jump backward, yet she remained unharmed, for the fairy circle of Queen Aquareine kept her safe. Now Cap'n Bill was attacked, and Princess Clia as well. The half-dozen slender legs darted in every direction, like sword thrusts, to reach their victims, and the cruel claws snapped so rapidly that the sound was like the rattling of castanets. But the four prisoners regarded their enemy with smiling composure, and no yell greeted the Yell Maker's efforts. "Enough," said Zog, softly and sweetly. "You may retire, my poor Yell Maker, for with these people you are powerless." The creature paused and rolled its yellow eyes. "May I nip just one of the slaves, oh Zog?" he asked pleadingly. "I hate to leave without pleasing your ears with a single yell." "Let my slaves alone," was Zog's answer. "They are here to serve me and must not be injured. Go, feeble one." "Not so," cried the queen. "It is a shame, Zog, that such an evil thing should exist in our fair sea." With this, she drew her fairy wand from a fold of her gown and waved it toward the creature. At once the Yell Maker sank down unconscious upon the floor. Its legs fell apart in many pieces, the claws tumbling in a heap beside the body. Then all grew withered and lost shape, becoming a pulpy mass like gelatin. A few moments later, the creature had melted away to nothing at all, forever disappearing from the ocean where it had caused so much horror and pain. Zog watched this destruction with surprising patience. When it was all over, he nodded his head and smiled, and Trot noticed that whenever Zog smiled, his slaves lost their jolly looks and began to tremble. "That is very pretty magic, Aquareine," said the monster. "I myself learned the trick several thousand years ago, so it does not astonish me. Have you fairies nothing that is new to show me?" "We desire only to protect ourselves," replied the queen with dignity. "Then I will give you a chance to do so," said Zog. As he spoke, the great marble blocks in the ceiling of the room directly over the heads of the captives gave way and came crashing down upon them. Many tons of weight were in these marble blocks, and the magician had planned to crush his victims where they stood. But the four were still unharmed. The marble, being unable to touch them, was diverted from its course, and when the roar of the great crash had died away, Zog saw his intended victims standing quietly in their places and smiling scornfully at his weak attempts to destroy them. End of chapter 15. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum, Chapter 16, The Top of the Great Dome. Cap'n Bill's heart was beating pretty fast, but he did not let Zog know that. Trot was so sure of the protection of the fairy mermaids that she would not allow herself to become frightened. Aquareine and Clia were as calm as if nothing had happened. "Please excuse this little interruption," said Zog. "I knew very well the marble blocks could not hurt you, but the play is over for a time. You may now retire to your rooms, and when I again invite you to my presence, I shall have found some better way to entertain you." Without reply to this threat, they turned and followed Sacco from the hall, and the boy led them straight back to their own rooms. "Zog is making a great mistake," said Sacco with a laugh. "He has no time for vengeance, but the great magician does not know that." "What is he trying to do, anyway?" asked Trot. "He does not tell me his secrets, but I've an idea he wants to kill you," replied Sacco. "How absurd it is to be plotting such a thing when he might spend his time in laughing and being jolly, isn't it now?" "Zog is a wicked, wicked creature!" exclaimed Trot. "But he has his good points," replied Sacco cheerfully. "There is no one in all the world so bad that there is nothing good about him." "I'm not so sure of that," said Cap'n Bill. "What are Zog's good points?" All his slaves were saved from drowning, and he is kind to them," said Sacco. "That is merely the kindness of selfishness," said Aquareine. "Tell me, my lad, is the opening in the great dome outside guarded?" "Yes, indeed," was the reply. "You cannot hope to escape in that way, for the Prince of the Sea Devils, who is the largest and fiercest of his race, lies crouched over the opening night and day, and none can pass his network of curling legs." "Is there no avenue that is not guarded?" continued Aquareine. "None at all, your Majesty. Zog is always careful to be well guarded, for he fears the approach of an enemy. What this enemy can be to terrify the powerful magician, I do not know, but Zog is always afraid and never leaves an entrance unguarded. Besides, it is an enchanted castle, you know, and none in the ocean can see it unless Zog wishes him to. So it will be very hard for his enemy to find him." "We wish to escape," said Clia. "Will you help us, Sacco?" "In any way I can," replied the boy. "If we succeed, we will take you with us," continued the princess. But Sacco shook his head and laughed. "I would indeed like to see you escape Zog's vengeance," said he, "for vengeance is wrong, and you are too pretty and too good to be destroyed. But I am happy here and have no wish to go away, having no other home or friends other than my fellow slaves." Then he left them, and when they were again alone, Aquareine said, "We were able to escape Zog's attacks today, but I am quite sure he will plan more powerful ways to destroy us. He has shown that he knows some clever magic, and perhaps I shall not be able to foil it. So it will be well for us to escape tonight if possible." "Can you fight and conquer the big sea devil up in the dome?" asked Trot. The queen was thoughtful and did not reply to this question at once. But Cap'n Bill said uneasily, "I can't abide them devil critters, and I hopes for my part we won't be called on to tackle 'em. You see, Trot, we're in considerable of a bad mess, and if we ever live to tell the tale—" "Why not, Cap'n?" asked the child. "We're safe enough so far. Can't you trust to our good friend, the queen?" "She don't seem plumb sure o' things herself," remarked the sailor. "The mermaids is all right and friendly, mate, but this here magic maker, ol' Zog, is a bad one out and out, and means to kill us if he can." "But he can't!" cried Trot bravely. "I hope you're right, dear. I wouldn't want to bet on Zog's chances just yet, and at the same time it would be riskin' money to bet on our chances. Seems to me it's a case of luck which wins." "Don't worry, friend," said the queen. "I have a plan to save us. Let us wait patiently until nightfall." They waited in the rose chamber a long time, talking earnestly together, but the brilliant light that flooded both the room and the great dome outside did not fade in the least. After several hours had passed away, the gong sounded and Tom Atto again appeared, followed by 4 slaves bearing many golden dishes upon silver trays. The friendly cook had prepared a fine dinner, and they were glad to find that whatever Zog intended to do to them, he had no intention of starving them. Perhaps the magician realized that Aquarine's fairy powers, if put to the test, would be able to provide food for her companions. But whatever his object may have been, their enemy had given them splendid rooms and plenty to eat. "Isn't it nearly nighttime?" asked the queen, as Tom Atto spread the table with a cloth of woven seaweed and directed his men to place the dishes upon it. "Night!" he exclaimed as if surprised. "There is no night here." "Doesn't it ever get dark?" inquired Trot. "Never. We know nothing of the passage of time or of day and night. The light always shines just as you see it now, and we sleep whenever we are tired and rise again as soon as we are rested." "What causes the light?" Princess Clia asked. "It's magic, your highness," said the cook solemnly. "It's one of the curious things Zog is able to do. But you must remember all this place is a big cave in which the castle stands, so the light is never seen by anyone except those who live here." "But why does Zog keep his light going all the time?" asked the queen. "I suppose it is because he himself never sleeps," replied Tom Atto. "They say the master hasn't slept for hundreds of years, not since Anko the sea serpent defeated him and drove him into this place." They asked no more questions and began to eat their dinner in silence. Before long, Cap'n Joe came in to visit his brother and took a seat at the table with the prisoners. He proved a jolly fellow, and when he and Cap'n Bill talked about their boyhood days, the stories were so funny that everybody laughed and for a time forgot their worries. When dinner was over, however, and Cap'n Joe had gone back to his work of sewing on buttons, and the servants had carried away the dishes, the prisoners remembered their troubles and the fate that awaited them. "I am much disappointed," said the queen, "to find there is no night here and that Zog never sleeps. It will make our escape more difficult. Yet we must make the attempt, and as we are tired and a great struggle is before us, it will be best for us to sleep and refresh ourselves." They agreed to this, for the day had been long and adventurous. So Cap'n Bill kissed Trot and went into the Peony Room, where he lay down upon his spongy couch and soon fell fast asleep. The mermaids and Trot followed this example, and I think none of them was much worried after all, because they quickly sank into peaceful slumber and forgot all the dangers that threatened them. End of chapter 16.